Shakespeare grew up in a world which knew what religious crises were all about. Just before he was born, the state had passed the Act of Uniformity by only 3 votes. This effectively gave the Church of England an established authority in the land and meant that everybody had to go to church on a Sunday. None of the bishops present voted for it. When he was 5 years old, his father sanctioned the whitewashing of the murals in the Guild Chapel in Stratford-upon-Avon. John Shakespeare was mayor at the time. This was part of the covering over of visual signs of the residual feeling of Roman Catholicism in the land. And the year after that, when Shakespeare was just 6, Pope Pius V excommunicated Elizabeth I, effectively making her fair game for any would-be Roman Catholic assassin. This meant for Elizabeth that anti-Catholic laws had to be introduced in order to protect ordinary people. So anything which was smacking of Roman Catholicism was frowned on, and everybody had to go to church. And if you didn't, you were called a recusant, you were fined, and you were suspected of being a Roman Catholic. So what do we find when we go looking for religion in Shakespeare's work? Well, perhaps surprisingly, the first thing we find is doubt. I'm thinking especially of the great work King Lear, when we find there perhaps an anti-Christian play or an a-Christian play, but not a non-religious play, by which I mean it's a play which raises the universal questions of existence and is not afraid to do so. We have Lear literally railing against the heavens in Act 3. Blow, winds, crack your cheeks, rage, blow, crack nature's moulds, all Germans spill at once that make ingrateful man. And at the end of the play, he's asking a question of despair in his last gasps of life over his dead daughter's body, Cordelia, when he looks at her and says, "Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all?" Antonio in The Tempest, the usurping brother of Prospero, is not afraid to say, "I feel not this deity in my bosom." So there is doubt in Shakespeare, but he's a playwright and he's able to put one point of view against another all the time. We also find the Bible referenced many hundreds of times across the work. His favourite books are from the New Testament, especially the Gospels, but he also refers a lot to the books of Genesis, Job, and the Psalms from the Old Testament. And it amuses me to realise, as Hannibal Hamlin writes in the Bible in Shakespeare, that the person who quotes Shakespeare most often in the plays is none other than the whoring and drunken John Falstaff in Henry IV Parts 1 and 2 and The Merry Wives of Windsor. Falstaff never evangelises and gets his Bible wrong. We might go looking for typological expressions of religious faith in the plays, by which I mean, for example, resurrection narratives, which are writ large in Shakespeare. Characters who we think are dead, who somehow miraculously come back to life at the end of the plays. For example, the Comedy of Errors, Much Ado About Nothing, Measure for Measure, Twelfth Night or What You Will, Cymbeline, Pericles, The Winter's Tale, perhaps most miraculously of all, that final play when the Queen Hermione's statue comes to life through the use of magical music, and she is given back, as it were, miraculously to her husband, King Leontes. Another way of thinking about Shakespeare and religion is its connection to the natural world. Think of Duke Senior at the beginning of Act 2 in As You Like It, who finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. Think of the waking Princess Imogen against the corpse of the person who she believes to be her husband in Cymbeline, and she implores heaven for a smaller drop of pity as a wren's eye. And perhaps most famously, there's Hamlet, who just moments before he's murdered invokes St. Matthew's Gospel and recalls that there's special providence in the fall of a sparrow. These images from the natural world in relation to religion fascinate me, because if we're looking for Christianity in the work, it seems to me there we have the doctrine of the incarnation writ large. That is, God incarnate, God in humanity. So Shakespeare is always able, as a playwright, to balance and challenge many different perspectives, one against the other. But I think in the end, he is somebody who is able to express an openness to the mystery of our existence, an openness to what God might mean, and an openness especially to the natural world, and perhaps how that might relate spiritually to the doctrine of the incarnation.